I'm sure you.
But see, that's the problem of teacher education then, and that's why teacher education is both difficult and sad. In the schools of education are afraid, partially because of parental movements, to deal with the fact that they are political actors. And I, for one, would not be a teacher today in a public situation, because I couldn't possibly stand the kind of control that's going on. I think it's absurd. I think it's but at the same time, the educator and the curriculum person has not made a public stand strong enough to counteract that, and that's our fault.
Certainly I share that, but don't you think also that the whole establishment is in some way victimized, that there's been a process of scapegoating?
Oh, no, there's no question about that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, yeah.
There is culpability, but there's also a victim.
And I think, I think that given that sort of schema, then identifying the histories that are necessary are clarified. And that's where I think your focus upon discourse systems, where it was valuable, at the same time got caught, in that people then started to focus simply on the discourse systems rather than that to which they point.
Right. I share that completely.
Yeah, no, I know.
I left the discourse.
Yeah, no, I know you have. Yeah, no, I know you have.
No, that's right. It was a...
And I'm not, the thing that's working at the present time in terms of schooling and teaching is the work that's being done in teaching itself, particularly by the guy that's at the University of Washington in Seattle, who was at Wisconsin.
Zeichner.
Is that his name? Yeah, who's doing a lot on helping teachers do the feedback on their own teaching, become aware, which I think is an important piece of it. As long as it is broad enough that the political aspect also gets in there. And I'm not sure that that can or will.
That's a question I have for you. I mean, it's associated with this idea of feedback. You in one of your essays, you almost, it seems to me, you get close to defining teaching as behavioral. And in another essay, you seem sympathetic with the idea of the videotaping of teaching and so on. And so I'm wondering, with your present emphasis upon this political element of teaching, whether behavior and observation are adequate to...
Oh, no, I don't think that they're adequate, but I think they're necessary. I don't have any question about that. It seems to me that, and I learned this not necessarily from that literature, but working with the students at Union Seminary, that helping them listen to their own teaching. We started out using videotapes, but it became a little too technical, a little too inclined, financially difficult, hence the audio taping. Just listening to themselves teach and having other people respond to that was absolutely necessary for them to become aware of what they were doing. It wasn't adequate, but it was necessary.
And when what they were doing, what in general, was that fairly exclusively focused on matters of behavior, or what we might say is style,
no,
or was it also content?
Oh, it was content, because when I would be working with, again, I'm talking about my early experience at Union Seminary, working with the TAs there, my primary focus was to deal with their teaching from the point of view of their discipline. So if we had an Old Testament TA beginning to talk about their teaching, I would start to say, if you are planning a course for teaching the Old Testament, what does the Hebrew Bible say about origins? And how do you think about the origin of a class over against the origin in terms of your historical thing. Or if you're talking theology, I would try to bring theological language to bear upon as a critique. So they use their own discipline as a way of critiquing their teaching. I would not focus upon the psychological aspects.
All right.
But I would focus then on the communicating aspects, the language aspects, in terms of language as being domineering or listening or controlling or things of that kind.
But you agree that involves more than behavior. You have to discern the inward experience.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know what you mean by behavior there.
I guess, and maybe you would suggest I have too narrow a definition, but the observable.
Well, yeah, okay. No, I would agree that that's, if it's simply observable in terms of having an external person come and characterize what was going on by check marks and so on.
Like Flanders, that would be the
right. No, that doesn't make sense. That makes sense, but it's not adequate.
It's not adequate.
Because there is the intonation, there is the hidden intent that needs to be explored.
And subtle cues that you...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, there's no question about that.
That's why I'm pressing the matter.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. Which is why, the audio tapes, you could pick up from intonation a hell of a lot sometimes. And you could also pick up the way they respond or do not respond all the time.
You couldn't see the nonverbal.
No, you can't.
Nonverbal, but you
Yeah.
could hear.
Did you ever read any of Maria Harris's stuff in Religious Ed?
No, but I know the name.
Maria Harris was in, Bruce Joyce and I were co-teaching for a while at
You
Union.
and Bruce Joyce.
Yeah, that was a great experience for a while. Didn't last very long, but Bruce and I were teaching together, and we were using videotapes in the very beginning. And Maria Harris was a member of a religious order that I'm not sure which one. And she was in her habit. We videotaped her teaching in her habit. She took one look at herself teaching in her habit and practically pulled out her hair. And within a very short order, she had given up her habit. Now, I'm sure that was also tied to what was happening in her order. But she was so amazed at the way she looked in terms of presenting herself physically in the habit and the way she carried on, that she gave it up.
I still balk at the seeing oneself on the screen. It seems to me that it's a very particularistic version of oneself.
Oh yeah, no, there's no question about it. No question about it.
I can't stand the way I look.
You
I can't get rid of this.
You and Mike both have that. I can't stand to watch either of you on this, because I know both of you, and Mike comes through as so goddamn pompous and so sure of himself, and all those slight little jokes that he makes, which are made out of his own self-consciousness.
Self-referential.
And you have your own habits that bring forth laughter.
Equally irritating.
And I'm sure I do too.
No, I don't think you do at all, actually.
But no, I agree that. So.
But I wasn't your professor, so there's always that structure built in.
Geez, well. So the crucial thing is indeed identifying those key elements and then identifying the historical strands that have to be torn apart.
And that's related, it seems, to Joseph's question, although on a grander scale, how do the distortions? I mean, they end up being, what do you do with that knowledge and the recognition?
Right.
I don't think it'll save things in the States.
Oh, I know. I'm not sure that there's any possibility of saving schools at the present time.
That's right.
Bill
Gates wants them gone. Yeah.
Well, Bill Gates wants them going for other reasons.
Well, he's got the money to pull.
Yeah. The person I talked about at the University of Chicago who influenced me so much was Herb Thielen.
Yes.
And I remember Herb once saying, the only hope for schools is to burn them all down and start over again.
Well, That might be right, but the starting all over again is what Gates wants to do.
I know he doesn't.
Sell online.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, those are economic distortions
Right,
that are
right.
going on.
Yeah.
Oh, man, yeah.
And you would start all over again. So you would. So.
Well, I'm not sure what I would do given the political climate. That's one of the reasons that I'm no longer interested in the field. I did my trick,
I know, but
and I did as much as I could, and I'm not sure what the next step is, except for the intellectual clarification. And I still think that we as professional educators have failed the general public by failing to write and argue in such a way that they can identify what is happening in their own lives and in the lives of their children, and can see through the political, ideological structures that they're in. Now our gal in New York, our Diane Ravitch.
she's had a conversion experience.
Yeah, and her conversion experience has been very important, and I think that she is doing part of that public education.
That's what she's doing.
Yeah, and it's
doing all
good.
she can do.
But there aren't enough people doing that because we're caught up in our own sort of narrow streams in some ways. And who's the guy that is writing in the left-wing?
Kozo.
No, the educator, not Kozel. Kozel has done a good job of that.
He's done a great job with that.
He's done a good job. But who's the, he applied for a position at Teachers College once, and I remember him saying, the two of us, Maxine Green and I, we could really do things. And he has really been publishing a lot of stuff, and he's now dealing basically with political activity rather than simply schooling activity. He was up in Canada for a while.
Oh, Henry Giroux.
Oh yeah, Henry Giroux.
Sure, he's in Canada now, I think.
Yeah,
I haven't heard.
and Henry tried to
Did all
do.
he could, yeah.
Yeah, and then he also got caught up too much, I think, in a particular political structure, which means that he's no longer being able to be read by those people who should be reading him. And I don't know how we break into that anyway.
My quip about that, if you don't mind me inserting it, is, but what success could we possibly have if the priesthood and the preaching class with God on their side have managed very much?
Well, I don't disagree with you on that. Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. Well, except we have Pope Francis.
Is he going to save the world either? I mean,
he's not going to save the world, but he's going to maybe change the Curio, which will help a hell of a lot.
Well, see, and that's all I think we can do in the schools is these incremental things.
Oh, I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Anyway,
I no longer have the energy for it. But
well, I don't either.
it's your job, Joseph.
I'll get on that.
You get on that. You have 30 years ahead of you. Damn it! if I
He's only 27.
geez, if I had come back in another 40 years, I want to see some difference in this world.
You'll see difference, I'm sure. There's no question difference will happen, but
But whether it's the one.
Yeah, but I'm amazed at how the fact that I made this connection with Amazon. The man has ruined a crucial source of education.
No, you're just right about that, I think.
Just
right.
absolutely. And he's destroyed so many bookstores, really good bookstores. Oh, jeez.
And now he wants to destroy everything else.
That's right.
so with this being the state of man or humanity, you have faith in humanity that if humanity becomes aware of the distortions, they'll be able to handle that and process that? And
Well, no, I realize that the history of human sin and salvation goes back 2,000 years, and we are indeed faced with that sinful aspects of our nature. At one time, I thought perhaps the church could make a difference.
And it has individually, and it has in locales and situations.
It can.
It can.
It can. Oh, I don't disagree with that.
So is schooling for some people.
Private schooling does. I know some, the school that my kids went to in New York, the Calhoun School, is an absolutely fabulous school.
So that's what I'm going to ask you, Horace Mann. That school that you're describing now, does that at all challenge your insistence?
Horace Mann,
your insistence that it's intrinsically distorted?
Oh, no. Well, that is distorted, but in a positive direction, because there is the money there to make sure that teachers are carriers of certain kinds of traditions and intellectual traditions and communical traditions, as well as the content in that school is not determined by textbooks, but is determined by the people who are there, who are in and of themselves, and I made this point someplace else, who are strong, have strong commitments to substance, content fields, however you want to talk about it. Not in a narrow way, but in a broad way. So they have a science teacher there who works with the artists, and tremendous lab work going on in that school, from elementary school on up. And they have drama teachers who are there, and so on and so forth. So, and they draw upon then the wealth of New York City, both in terms of people who have the talents, but also many of their students are kids of very rich people who can then subsidize what's going on in that school. So there is less, the economic distortion there is positive rather than negative. And the budget battles for public education is part of our difficulty. Texas being the major, hopeless task with their control of the textbook industry. But the textbook industry also has to be looked at historically. Mm-hmm. How did it get so damn much power? And one of the reasons it got so damn much power is through the psychological thought and the development, the use of learning theory to shape instructional material in those materials.
That's right.
Doing,
rather than the content question.
Right. Doing away with libraries, which in and of itself is a major mistake, and assuming that reading, is simply a skill. Reading is not a skill. Reading is a confrontation with the literary world.
That's right. With otherness.
Yeah, with the otherness in print, right?
And it is a kind of relationship.
Right. And well, no, that's the other thing that needs to be picked up. I hear. Let's see if I can get that focus back. Yeah. The other evaluation material that good old Ralph is responsible for, not the sole responsible, but primarily major culprit, along with Ben, his follower at the University of Chicago, Ben Bloom. They have so distorted our thinking about education because they talk about skills that can be measured. Mm-hmm. The language of skill is inherently a limiting idea because skill enables empowerment, or skill provides power. And rather than talking about what skills people in schools have, we should be talking about what power kids have in school. Therefore, reading in order to pass the test, in order to go to the next grade, implies no empowerment other than movement within the school. But you have to ask, how does the skill of reading empower people? How do the skills of mathematics empower people? How do other disciplines, in a sense, give people power? People in schools are afraid of powerful kids. They want to keep them controlled with skills. The best illustration of that in my history is my experience with Emmy Sheehy, who was an early childhood educator at Teachers College when I first went there. Sort of a traditional but very good. We had Rumagans and Emmy and a couple other people, Millie Almy, really good people. Emmy, it was in one of her books, I think. she wrote, she said, and she was dealing with preschool and kindergarten kids. She said, a moving child is a threat to a teacher. What can I do about that? Who deals with movement? Dancers. I'm going to study dance in order to learn how to be with moving children rather than being frightened by them. So a moving child indeed is a sign of otherness, which brings forth a self-critique. The response is, how do I move with them?
Not lovely.
Oh, it's beautiful. It was absolutely a beautiful example. She then studied modern dance and would taught dance and music for preschool teachers.
That's lovely.
You know, just it's a beautiful illustration of that. Yeah.
There really was a whole generation of elementary people.
Oh, great. Alice Mile, Emmy.
Not necessarily all this sophisticated theory, but they had this sensibility and
Yeah, that was true of, you know, that was one of both the limits of Teachers College, but one of the strengths. And my first years at Teachers College were very good, but eventually became limiting. I was in an office suite with Leland Jacobs, Roma Gans, and I don't remember who else. Well,
sounds noisy. Sounds
oh, it
noisy.
was noisy. Leland, you know, taught the reading course, but he taught reading by dealing with children's literature. It wasn't a matter of reading skills. The reading skills were over there in some other department, so to speak. And every week there would be a load of children's books that would come in, because every publisher would send them his books, and we would spend several hours in the outer office reading these new children's books, having a ball. And he would invite writers, including Madeline Engel, to his classes, and he would talk literature and the kind of literature that kids should be reading. Well, that was law.
That's a content question.
That's exactly right.
That's the content.
Precisely a content question. That wasn't happening in the science area. Jacobson was a little bit more, and it wasn't happening in the social studies area either, although they had some pretty good historians at one time, which were reasonably creative. But the testing industry has distorted just a hell of a lot, just an awful lot.
Would you characterize these individuals you just named as in some way a supportive community? How did you find your way, because your own work is very distinctive and original, and no one else?
That's one of the reasons I finally left Teachers College, because I felt no support. I remember two things that illustrate that. When I began to raise questions about learning theory as the determining conceptual system. Heresy. I had Miriam Goldberg tear me apart.
Heresy.
In psychology. She was sort of furious. What else do you have? And she couldn't hear anything else, you know.
Right.
And Bob Schaefer, who was the dean at that time, and this is when I was beginning to use Heidegger and beginning to rethink what I was doing. He didn't understand what the hell I was doing. No. And he suggested to one of my colleagues in higher education, a guy by the name of Knox, I don't know if you know him or not, who was a reasonably bright guy. I think Bob asked Knox to have a conversation with me to see if Knox could understand what I was about, because Bob Schaefer couldn't understand what I was about. Well, I could handle that isolation as long as I had students who were responsive. And when we lost the students, then I felt a lack of support. And as the religious ed program began to fail.
At Union.
At Union, and that wasn't simply Union's fault, that was also, I think, a change in the larger structure of religious education. And the person in religious education who I was responsible for bringing in, Will Kennedy, came at it from an international perspective because he'd spent time in Geneva and had worked with not Illich, but Paulo. He was a good friend of Paulo's. And so he was getting at it slightly different ways. But there wasn't the same kind of curiosity. And I didn't feel any support in the field. You know, you supported me, but I felt very little support. I remember when I gave that lecture on the death of the curriculum field, the way I was sort of torn apart by people who were responding to me. The guy at Illinois and one of his students.
Well, we didn't want to. We didn't want it to be more.
No, God.
We didn't want it to.
I mean, and I was getting more support within the religious education field at that time than I was in the secular field.
I hated the paper too when you gave it, but I think it's right now. But I think it's right now.
So did Jim. Jim was furious at me when I did things like
Yeah, I
that.
hated the paper.
Oh.
Why was he?
Why did you hate it?
Quite in the contrast to the Poetry and Power paper, for example,
Yeah.
which I thought was one of the most thrilling
Yeah.
things I'd ever heard. I hated it because here I was attempting to start a journal, start a conference to try to bring it back to life. I knew it was dead,
Yeah.
but here was the father nailing the coffin shut.
Yeah.
That's what was so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did Jim hate it?
Well, Jim was really committed to schooling. I mean, and I said that in that paper that I did ahead of his memorial. Yeah. He was really a good school person, not in a narrow sense, but in carrying with it just a lot of hope that things could be done, and which I think he did probably at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, where he was a principal of the elementary school.
And he carried it on at Greensboro with his graduate program.
Yeah, and there was no question about his dedication to schooling. And he thought that I was really coming down hard on schooling. And yet Jim and I, when we'd get together, we'd been reading the same stuff even though we hadn't been in touch with one another. His intellectual curiosity was also spurred by Hans Gerth. I mean, he and I were close together with Hans Gerth classes. And when Hans's wife committed suicide, Jim and I were part of the doctoral students that Hans was working with to be available and supportive of them. So, and when I started to read in phenomenology, Jim was reading in it. You know, we were very parallel there. But he never gave up, partially because he was with school people. Esther Zarrett was very supportive of Jim.
I always felt Jim was an old-fashioned schoolman. He had the intellectual stuff.
I think that's right.
He wasn't as devoted and intellectual as you
No,
were.
and I
didn't have the depth.
And he had the depth, but he didn't necessarily.
The detail then.
Yeah, he didn't see the problem in the same way that I saw the problem. Yeah. And you know, when people at Teachers College raised questions about my theorizing, that's when I said, hey, I'll take over the elementary school for a couple of years and run it, to show them that I was also a school person. I'll never forget that.
What was it like?
Well, I made a couple of serious errors, but I had some really fine teachers, great teachers. I started the school year out by going into those classrooms the day before they started and putting a flower on each teacher's desk, you know, and supported the teachers up to the maximum. We had a first and second grade teacher who was interested in working with the kids on crystals. I called the Department of Geology at Columbia University and said, do you have somebody over there who's interested in crystallography that would like to come and work with elementary school teachers? And we bought a microprojector, and she came over and worked with the teachers for several weeks and then started to work with the students, you know. And that's a content problem, you know. It's not a matter of
Skill development or sequence.
Yeah, it's a matter of getting them in. We would, I don't remember what crystals we were growing, but we would grow crystals and watch them grow under microprojector, you know, a wonderful experience. A real combination of aesthetics and science, so just beautiful. And I had an elementary school librarian that was fabulous. third and fourth grade kids would come down and take dictation from the kindergarten kids. They would turn it into books, and the books would go into the library. You know, I got rid of a art teacher once in midterm and created a furor because of the way I did it. I mean, I was stupid administratively. I wasn't stupid in terms of what I was doing, but so yeah. Well.
The Englewood, was it Englewood?
Well, Englewood, yeah. That Teachers College had a long history of school surveys.
Well, that was from the 30s.
Right. And, you know, we did it in Washington, D.C. Harry Passo chaired that search. I remember going in and writing a critique of their social studies program. You know, it didn't make a goddamn bit of difference, of course. Alice was very involved in that, and they got me involved in that. Harry Passo was on the Board of Education of Englewood, and they wanted a survey, and Harry asked if I would do it, which wasn't anything that I really wanted to do, but
you did it.
But I did it.
You did it in a different way, too.
Yeah, I did it in a different way. I'm not sure that anybody approved of it.
Well, I did when I read it.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was a really good report.
I couldn't fix it and put it in the book, but I wanted to.
I'm not sure that Harry was too happy with it either. And I don't know if it made any difference, but they were doing some ungraded classroom stuff that was pretty good. All they needed to do was to focus on it a little bit more, but they were getting so much flack. And again, the testing movement was the thing that was getting in the way. They wanted data, hard data.
Hard data.
They didn't ask about what was happening to their kids.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
The rich folks sometimes do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now there's a movement against the testing, as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I'm responsive. I've seen that. That's great, particularly when teachers and parents together rebel. But that's also something that I, in one of my papers down at LSU for you, focused upon. That is
It was one of your
community aspects of maybe
challenges bequeathed.
the colleagueship between teachers and parents, which is messed up today, again, because of the the testing stuff. Yeah, so. What does that sort of lay out what I'm suggesting about grammar? In some ways?
Sure.
Tentatively, not fully.
I find the use of the term grammar for me was...
Well, I agree with that. I mean, that's simply because I respect the way Chomsky handled the deep grammar idea.
And I'm just not, I'm ignorant of that. I'm thinking it's more like a kind of genealogy in Foucault's sense.
And Foucault's language is not my language, so yeah,
right.
But
maybe they're the same concept.
Well, it could be. You know, I don't. Foucault came late in my philosophical.
But you say some things. I noted it when I was rereading that I wrote and I want to make. I want to register it in a piece somewhere that you make statements that are Foucault-like.
Oh, really?
Before Foucault, the productive use of power is one of them. When you were
Well, that's
talking
true.
earlier today,
Yeah, you know, I developed that power theme my first couple of years of Teachers College.
Yeah, and he's famous for.
Yeah, I know he
power,
is.
not just the squashing everything, but
Yeah,
also
yeah,
it's a vitality in life.
So you have questions now, Joseph?
I do. I'm just soaking it in right now.